Before we dive into this incredible story of unexpected wisdom and justice, make sure to comment where you're watching from today. When Judge Richard Maxwell demanded that Bruce Willis remove his cross or face a fine that morning, he had no idea he was about to witness something extraordinary. In the marble-lined halls of the Los Angeles Superior Court, where justice and law intertwined daily, no one expected an ordinary Tuesday morning to become one of the most memorable days in the courthouse's history. Judge Maxwell, known for his strict adherence to courthouse protocols and somewhat controversial interpretations of the separation of church and state, was about to meet his match in the most unexpected way. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of courtroom 5B, where Bruce Willis sat quietly, his presence commanding attention despite his attempt to remain inconspicuous. The legendary actor wasn't there for a major case or a headline-grabbing lawsuit. Instead, he was present for what should have been a routine traffic violation hearing. Around his neck, partially visible beneath his crisp white shirt collar, hung a simple gold cross, a family heirloom that had been with him through countless films and personal battles. Judge Maxwell, a man whose 62 years had been dedicated to maintaining what he considered proper courtroom decorum, noticed the religious symbol immediately. His steel-gray eyes narrowed behind his wire-rimmed glasses, and his reputation for being particularly strict about religious displays in his courtroom was about to take center stage. Lisa Rodriguez, the court reporter with 15 years of experience, sensed the tension building. She had seen that look in Judge Maxwell's eyes before. It usually preceded what the courthouse staff had come to call his constitutional lectures. Her fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, knowing this morning was about to become anything but routine. Alexandra Chen, Willis's attorney, sat beside her client with the composed demeanor of someone who had fought and won countless legal battles. She had advised Willis about Judge Maxwell's particular stance on religious symbols, but the actor had been adamant about wearing his cross, not as a statement, but as a personal matter of faith and family tradition. The courtroom was relatively empty that morning, with only a handful of people present for various minor cases. Catherine Wright, a veteran journalist who had covered the courthouse for nearly 2 decades, sat in the back row. She had come for a different case entirely but found herself witnessing what would soon become an extraordinary display of legal knowledge from an unexpected source. "Mr. Willis," Judge Maxwell's voice cut through the quiet murmur of the courtroom, "I notice you're wearing a religious symbol in my courtroom." His tone carried the weight of authority and a hint of disapproval. In this courthouse, we maintain strict neutrality regarding religious expressions. The room fell silent. Officer Robert Sullivan, the court bailiff, shifted uncomfortably. He had been a fan of Willis's films since childhood, and something about seeing John McClane himself being challenged stirred a mix of emotions in him. Bruce Willis's response was measured, respectful, but carried an underlying strength that anyone familiar with his iconic characters would recognize. "Yes, Your Honor. It's a family heirloom." Judge Maxwell's gavel tapped the bench, not a full strike, but a warning. "I'll have to ask you to remove it or face a contempt charge and a fine." The judge's voice carried the finality of someone used to having his orders followed without question. Mark Anderson, the assistant district attorney present for other cases that morning, watched with growing interest. He had seen Judge Maxwell's strict interpretations before, but something about this moment felt different. Rachel Parker, the judge's newly appointed law clerk, quickly began pulling relevant cases on her tablet, anticipating the need for legal precedents. But what happened next would render her research unnecessary. Bruce Willis, the man known worldwide for playing unorthodox heroes who triumph against impossible odds, straightened in his chair. His expression wasn't confrontational. Instead, it carried the calm confidence of someone about to reveal an unexpected hand. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying that familiar tone that had delivered countless memorable lines, "I believe we might need to discuss Cohen v. California, 1971, and the Supreme Court's ruling on personal expression in courtrooms." The change in the atmosphere was palpable. Judge Maxwell's eyebrows rose slightly, the only visible crack in his stern demeanor. Catherine Wright leaned forward in her seat, her reporter's instincts telling her she was about to witness something extraordinary. Alexandra Chen suppressed a smile. She had known about her client's passionate interest in constitutional law, a side of him the public rarely saw. Years of dealing with contracts, intellectual property rights, and various legal challenges had led Willis to become well-versed in legal matters, particularly concerning individual rights. Furthermore, Willis continued, his tone respectful but firm. The Supreme Court's decision in Tinker v. Des Moines Independent Community School District established that wearing symbolic items falls under protected speech, provided they don't substantially disrupt proceedings. Thomas Bennett, the senior court administrator who had stepped in to deliver some paperwork, found himself pausing at the door, captivated by the scene unfolding before him. Here was Bruce Willis, action movie icon, calmly citing Supreme Court cases with the precision of a seasoned attorney. Judge Maxwell's expression shifted subtly. As a man devoted to the law, he couldn't help but recognize the accuracy and relevance of the citations. "Mr. Willis," he said, his tone carrying a new note of professional curiosity, "you seem well-versed in constitutional law." "Your Honor," Willis responded, "I believe in being prepared for life's battles, whether they're in front of a camera or in a courtroom. The law, like a good script, is about understanding the fundamentals of human rights and justice." William Foster, the veteran courthouse security guard, had seen thousands of cases in his 27 years of service. But watching Bruce Willis transform from action hero to constitutional scholar was something entirely new. As the morning sun continued to fill the courtroom, those present realized they were witnessing more than just a minor traffic court proceeding. They were seeing a demonstration of how knowledge, respect, and understanding could transform a potential confrontation into a moment of revelation. The story of what happened next would soon spread through the courthouse and beyond, reminding everyone that true strength often lies not in physical power or authority, but in the ability to stand firm for one's rights through knowledge and reason. The tension in courtroom 5B had transformed into something entirely unexpected. What began as a simple traffic violation hearing had evolved into a masterclass in constitutional law, delivered by none other than Bruce Willis. The actor's calm demeanor and precise legal knowledge had caught everyone off guard, especially Judge Richard Maxwell. Mark Anderson, the assistant district attorney, leaned forward in his seat, his legal pad forgotten as he watched the scene unfold. In his 15 years of prosecution, he had never witnessed anything quite like this. The man before them wasn't just reciting memorized cases, he was demonstrating a deep understanding of constitutional principles. "Your Honor," Willis continued, his voice carrying the same authority that had commanded attention on screen for decades, "I'd like to draw your attention to the 2004 case of Newdow v. United States Congress, where the Supreme Court specifically addressed the distinction between personal religious expression and state-sponsored religious activities." Alexandra Chen watched her client with barely concealed pride. She had known about Willis's extensive legal knowledge, but seeing him deploy it with such precision was something else entirely. The months they had spent discussing various cases and constitutional interpretations were paying off in ways neither of them had anticipated. Judge Maxwell removed his glasses, a gesture that Lisa Rodriguez, the court reporter, had seen countless times before. It usually signaled that the judge was preparing to either deliver a stern rebuke or acknowledge a compelling argument. The courtroom held its breath, waiting to see which it would be. "Mr. Willis," the judge began, his tone carrying a note of professional curiosity, "you've clearly studied constitutional law extensively. Please continue with your argument regarding personal religious expression in government buildings." Willis nodded respectfully before proceeding. "Thank you, Your Honor. The Supreme Court has consistently held that while government entities must maintain religious neutrality, this doesn't extend to prohibiting individual expression of faith through personal items or symbols, provided they don't disrupt proceedings or attempt to proselytize." Rachel Parker, the law clerk, found herself cross-referencing Willis's citations on her tablet. Each case he mentioned was not only relevant but perfectly applied to the current situation. This wasn't just about wearing a cross. It was about the fundamental balance between religious freedom and governmental neutrality. Catherine Wright, the journalist, had already abandoned her notes about the other case she'd come to cover. This was the story, how an action movie star had transformed a potential confrontation into a sophisticated legal discourse on constitutional rights. Furthermore, Willis continued, In Employment Division versus Smith, Justice Scalia wrote about the importance of protecting religious expression from governmental interference when that expression doesn't conflict with neutral, generally applicable laws. My wearing of this cross, a family heirloom, creates no such conflict. Officer Robert Sullivan, the bailiff, noticed how the other people waiting for their cases had become completely engrossed in the proceedings. Even those who had initially seemed annoyed by the delay were now watching with rapt attention as John McClane himself delivered a constitutional law lecture worthy of a top law school. Thomas Bennett, who had remained by the door, couldn't help but think how the scene before him defied every Hollywood stereotype about action stars. Your Honor, Willis went on, I'd also like to address the concept of reasonable accommodation as established in Trans World Airlines versus Hardison. While that case dealt primarily with workplace religious accommodation, its principles regarding minimal burden and reasonable accommodation have been applied more broadly in public settings. Judge Maxwell's stern demeanor had gradually shifted to one of engaged interest. As a jurist who prided himself on thorough legal analysis, he couldn't ignore the sophistication of the argument being presented. In my years in the entertainment industry, Willis added, I've learned that every right comes with responsibility. I wear this cross not as a challenge to the court's authority or to make any public statement, but as a personal expression of faith and family tradition. The Supreme Court has repeatedly protected such personal expressions, provided they don't interfere with governmental functions. William Foster, watching from his security post, noticed how even the other court officers had stopped their usual movements to listen. In all his years at the courthouse, he had never seen someone so effectively challenge Judge Maxwell's strict interpretations while maintaining absolute respect for the court. Alexandra Chen subtly passed a note to her client, but Willis gently waved it away. He didn't need prompting or assistance. This was personal for him, and his knowledge came from years of genuine interest and study. Consider, Your Honor, he continued, the case of Good News Club versus Milford Central School, where the Supreme Court emphasized that religious expression shouldn't face special disabilities or be excluded from the public sphere solely because of its religious nature. The morning had transformed into something none of the present parties had expected. Instead of a simple traffic hearing or a confrontation over courtroom rules, they were witnessing a sophisticated discussion about the boundaries between personal religious expression and governmental neutrality. Lisa Rodriguez's fingers flew across her stenotype machine, knowing that this transcript would be requested and studied. This wasn't just about a cross or a traffic violation anymore. It was about fundamental constitutional principles being articulated by an unexpected constitutional scholar. The framers of our Constitution, Willis said, his voice carrying the weight of conviction, understood that religious freedom doesn't mean religious absence. It means finding the balance between personal expression and institutional neutrality. This cross represents that personal expression, worn not to challenge or confront, but as a quiet affirmation of faith and family tradition. Judge Maxwell leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Willis, your knowledge of constitutional law is impressive. But tell me, what sparked this interest in legal scholarship? The question seemed to energize Willis even further. Your Honor, in my career, I've played many characters who fought for justice in physical ways. But I've always believed that true justice is fought for in courts and through knowledge. Every script I read about law or justice led me to study the real cases behind the drama. Over time, it became more than research, it became a passion. Catherine Wright was already composing the opening lines of her article in her head. This wasn't just about a celebrity in court, this was about challenging assumptions and revealing the depths that lay beneath public personas. As Willis spoke, the sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows had shifted, casting new patterns across the courtroom. Judge Maxwell's bench was now illuminated, highlighting the subtle changes in his expression as he listened to arguments that challenged his long-held position on religious symbols in his courtroom. Your Honor, Willis continued, the Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized that the expression of religious belief through symbolic items is a fundamental aspect of religious freedom. In Lynch versus Donnelly, the court noted that the Constitution doesn't require complete separation of church and state. It affirmatively mandates accommodation, not merely tolerance, of all religions and forbids hostility toward any. The morning had become a reminder that knowledge and understanding could come from unexpected sources, and that true strength often lay not in authority or fame, but in the ability to articulate principles with clarity and conviction. Thomas Bennett, still watching from near the door, realized he was witnessing something that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. This wasn't just about a celebrity avoiding a fine. It was about the unexpected depths of knowledge that can lie beneath public personas. The story of Bruce Willis's unexpected legal expertise would soon spread beyond the confines of Courtroom 5B, becoming a reminder that beneath every public image might lie depths of knowledge and understanding just waiting to be revealed. As the morning sun reached its zenith outside the courthouse windows, the atmosphere in Courtroom 5B had transformed entirely. What had begun as a potential clash between judicial authority and personal expression had evolved into something far more significant. Judge Richard Maxwell, known throughout the Los Angeles legal community for his unwavering stance on courthouse protocols, found himself in an unprecedented position. The judge's expression had shifted from stern authority to thoughtful consideration as he studied the man before him. Bruce Willis, still standing with quiet dignity, had just delivered what amounted to a comprehensive analysis of religious freedom under constitutional law. The gold cross around his neck caught the light, seeming to underscore every point he had made about personal expression and faith. Rachel Parker, the law clerk, had abandoned her tablet searches entirely. Every case Willis had cited was not only relevant but perfectly contextualized. She found herself scribbling notes, not for the judge's reference, but for her own future study. This was a masterclass in constitutional interpretation that no one had expected. Mr. Willis, Judge Maxwell spoke, breaking the charged silence that had fallen over the courtroom. You've presented a compelling argument about the intersection of personal religious expression and judicial authority. But let me pose a question to you. How do we balance individual rights with the need for judicial decorum? The question hung in the air, and Catherine Wright, the journalist, leaned forward in her seat. This was the moment that would define the encounter, not just legally, but philosophically. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Willis's response. "Your Honor," Willis began, his voice carrying that familiar tone that had commanded attention in countless films. "Judicial decorum and individual rights aren't opposing forces, they're complementary principles that strengthen each other. The same Constitution that establishes judicial authority also protects individual expression." Alexandra Chen watched her client with quiet pride. She had prepared extensive arguments for this hearing, but Willis hadn't needed them. His understanding of constitutional principles went far beyond mere memorization. It showed years of genuine study and contemplation. "Consider," Willis continued, "the Supreme Court's own courtroom, where religious symbols are displayed as part of our cultural and legal heritage. The issue isn't the presence of religious expression, but rather its context and purpose. My cross is worn not to challenge authority, but as a personal expression of faith that predates this hearing and will continue beyond it." Mark Anderson, the assistant district attorney, found himself nodding unconsciously. In his years of prosecution, he had rarely heard such a clear articulation of the balance between institutional authority and personal rights. The actor's argument was becoming a lesson in constitutional law that any first-year law student would do well to study. Judge Maxwell removed his glasses again, this time placing them deliberately on his bench. "You've clearly studied these principles extensively, Mr. Willis. What drove you to develop such a deep understanding of constitutional law?" The question seemed to energize Willis even further. "Your Honor, in my career, I've often portrayed characters fighting against injustice. But I realized early on that real justice isn't won through physical strength, it's achieved through understanding and applying the law. Each role I took that touched on legal themes led me deeper into studying actual case law and constitutional principles." Lisa Rodriguez's fingers continued their dance across her stenotype machine, knowing that this transcript would be requested not just by legal professionals, but by those interested in seeing a different side of a Hollywood icon. This wasn't just court reporting anymore, it was documenting a moment that challenged preconceptions about celebrity, intelligence, and legal scholarship. "The Constitution," Willis continued, "is much like a screenplay in one crucial aspect: every word matters, and interpretation requires understanding context, history, and intent. But unlike a screenplay, the Constitution's impact on individual lives is real and profound. That's why I've dedicated years to studying it, particularly in areas where personal rights intersect with institutional authority. Thomas Bennett, still watching from near the door, noticed how the other waiting cases had been forgotten. Everyone in the courtroom was absorbed in this unexpected dialogue between a Hollywood legend and a respected judge about the foundations of constitutional law. "Your Honor," Willis added, "the Founding Fathers understood that true justice requires balancing competing principles. They created a system where individual rights and institutional authority could coexist, each strengthening the other. My wearing this cross doesn't diminish the court's authority. If anything, the court's protection of personal expression enhances its authority by demonstrating fidelity to constitutional principles." Officer Robert Sullivan, the bailiff, had never seen Judge Maxwell engage in such an extended dialogue with any defendant. But this was no ordinary exchange. It was a sophisticated discussion about the very principles that formed the foundation of American justice. The morning had revealed something that went beyond the immediate issue of wearing a religious symbol in court. It showed how knowledge, properly articulated and respectfully presented, could bridge the gap between authority and individual rights. "Mr. Willis," Judge Maxwell spoke again, his tone notably different from his earlier stern warnings, "you've presented an articulate and well-reasoned defense of personal religious expression within institutional settings. But let me ask you this. How do we prevent this protection from becoming a precedent that might disrupt future proceedings?" Willis's response was immediate and measured. "Your Honor, the Supreme Court has provided clear guidelines for distinguishing between protected personal expression and potentially disruptive displays. In Tinker v. Des Moines, which I mentioned earlier, the court established that personal expression is protected unless it materially and substantially interferes with appropriate discipline or operation. William Foster, from his security post, noticed how even the other court officers had stopped their usual routines to listen. In all his years at the courthouse, he had never seen someone so effectively combine respect for authority with a defense of individual rights. Furthermore, Willis continued, this court's authority to maintain decorum isn't diminished by allowing personal religious expression, it's enhanced by showing that such authority can coexist with constitutional protections. It's about finding the balance that the founders envisioned. Catherine Wright had filled several pages of her notebook, knowing that this story would resonate far beyond the legal community. It was about challenging assumptions, about the unexpected depths that lay beneath public personas, and about the power of knowledge to transform confrontation into conversation. Judge Maxwell leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The morning had not gone as he had expected. Instead of a simple matter of courtroom protocol, he had found himself engaged in one of the most intelligent discussions of constitutional principles he'd experienced in years. "Your Honor," Willis said, his voice carrying both conviction and respect, "throughout my career, I've learned that true strength isn't about domination, it's about understanding. The same principle applies to judicial authority. It's strongest when it protects the very rights it might seem to conflict with." The sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows had shifted, casting new patterns across the courtroom. Rachel Parker noticed how the light caught Willis's cross, transforming it from a point of contention into a symbol of something larger, the ongoing dialogue between individual rights and institutional authority. The morning had become more than a legal proceeding, it had become a reminder that knowledge and understanding could come from unexpected sources, and that true justice required both wisdom and respect for individual rights. As the courtroom waited for Judge Maxwell's response, those present understood they were witnessing something rare, a moment when celebrity, legal scholarship, and judicial authority had combined to create a deeper understanding of constitutional principles. The story of what happened next would soon spread through legal circles and beyond, becoming a reminder that sometimes the most powerful arguments come not from authority or fame, but from a genuine understanding of the principles that govern our rights and responsibilities. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows through the windows of courtroom 5B. Judge Richard Maxwell sat in contemplative silence, his earlier rigid stance on courthouse protocols transformed by the morning's unexpected legal discourse. Before him, Bruce Willis stood with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire defense, the gold cross around his neck no longer a point of contention but a symbol of something far more significant. "Mr. Willis," Judge Maxwell finally spoke, his voice carrying a tone of professional respect that few in the courtroom had heard before. "In my years on the bench, I've heard countless arguments about religious expression and constitutional rights. But rarely have I encountered such a thoughtful and well-reasoned defense of personal faith within institutional settings." The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Catherine Wright, the journalist who had witnessed the entire exchange, knew she was about to record a moment that would challenge public perceptions of both judicial authority and celebrity intelligence. "Before I make my ruling," the judge continued, "I want to address something you said earlier about the relationship between authority and individual rights. You suggested that true judicial authority is strengthened, not weakened, by protecting constitutional freedoms. Would you care to elaborate on that point?" Willis nodded, his response carrying the same measured confidence that had characterized his entire defense. "Your Honor, the strength of our judicial system lies not in rigid enforcement of rules, but in its ability to balance competing principles. When a court protects individual rights, even when they seem to challenge institutional authority, it demonstrates the very wisdom and fairness that gives that authority its legitimacy." Alexandra Chen watched her client with quiet pride. The months they had spent discussing constitutional law had revealed Willis's genuine passion for legal principles, but today had transformed that private knowledge into public revelation. "In essence," Willis continued, "when this court considers my right to wear this cross, it's not just about religious expression. It's about the fundamental principle that justice requires understanding both the letter and the spirit of the law. The same Constitution that establishes this court's authority also protects individual rights precisely because the founders understood that true justice needs both." Rachel Parker, the law clerk, had long since abandoned her legal research. Every argument Willis presented seemed to build on the previous ones, creating a comprehensive framework for understanding the relationship between personal rights and judicial authority. Judge Maxwell leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You've made reference throughout this hearing to various Supreme Court decisions. But what strikes me most is how you've woven these precedents into a coherent philosophy about the nature of justice itself. That's something many seasoned attorneys struggle to achieve." The courtroom remained silent, every person present understanding they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just about a cross or a courtroom rule anymore. It had become a masterclass in constitutional interpretation and judicial philosophy. "Your Honor," Willis responded, "in my career, I've often portrayed characters seeking justice through force. But studying law taught me that true justice comes through understanding. Every Supreme Court case I cited today tells part of a larger story about how our legal system balances authority with freedom, tradition with progress, institutional needs with individual rights." Mark Anderson, the assistant district attorney, found himself taking notes. In his years of prosecution, he had never heard constitutional principles explained with such clarity and practical application. This was the kind of argument that would be discussed in law schools. "The founders," Willis continued, "created a system where justice isn't just about following rules, it's about understanding why those rules exist and how they serve both individual liberty and institutional authority. This cross represents my personal faith, but defending my right to wear it speaks to something larger, the ongoing dialogue between personal freedom and societal order that makes our legal system unique." Lisa Rodriguez's fingers continued their dance across her stenotype machine, knowing that this transcript would be requested not just by legal professionals but by anyone interested in seeing how knowledge and respect could transform a potential confrontation into a moment of shared understanding. Judge Maxwell removed his glasses one final time, placing them deliberately on his bench. "Mr. Willis, you've done more than defend your right to wear a religious symbol. You've provided this court with a thoughtful examination of how personal rights and judicial authority can coexist and strengthen each other." The afternoon light had shifted, casting a warm glow across the courtroom. Thomas Bennet, still watching from his position near the door, noticed how the shadows had changed since the morning's initial confrontation. It seemed fitting, a physical representation of how perspectives had shifted throughout the day. Therefore, Judge Maxwell continued, I find not only that you have the right to wear your cross in this courtroom, but that your defense of that right has contributed to this court's understanding of constitutional principles. The fine is dismissed, and I would like the record to reflect the thoroughness and respect with which you presented your arguments. The tension that had filled the courtroom all morning finally broke, replaced by a sense of witnessing something remarkable. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was a demonstration of how knowledge, properly articulated and respectfully presented, could bridge the gap between authority and individual rights. Officer Robert Sullivan, the bailiff who had watched the entire proceedings, realized he had just witnessed something that went beyond his childhood admiration for Willis's films. This was a different kind of strength, the power of knowledge, understanding, and respectful discourse. Your Honor, Willis spoke one final time, thank you for allowing me to present this defense. It's reminded me that justice is served best when we take the time to understand not just our rights, but the principles behind them. As the judge nodded in acknowledgement, Catherine Wright was already composing the opening lines of her article. This story wasn't just about a celebrity avoiding a fine, it was about challenging assumptions, revealing hidden depths, and demonstrating how constitutional principles came alive when properly understood and articulated. William Foster, who had seen countless cases from his security post, understood that this day would be remembered not for its outcome, but for its reminder that justice required both wisdom and respect for individual rights. This court is adjourned, Judge Maxwell announced, but his tone carried something more than mere dismissal. It carried recognition of how this ordinary traffic hearing had transformed into an extraordinary lesson in constitutional law and judicial philosophy. As the participants prepared to leave courtroom 5B, they understood they had witnessed more than just a legal argument. They had seen how knowledge, respect, and understanding could transform potential conflict into meaningful dialogue. The story of Bruce Willis's courtroom defense would soon spread beyond the confines of the Los Angeles Superior Court, becoming a reminder that beneath every public image might lie unexpected depths of knowledge and understanding. It proved that true strength often lies not in authority or fame, but in the ability to articulate principles with clarity and conviction. For those who had witnessed it, this day would remain a powerful reminder that justice is served best when knowledge meets respect, when authority encounters understanding, and when the letter of the law is illuminated by the spirit of wisdom. As Willis gathered his belongings, the cross around his neck caught the afternoon light one final time. It had become more than a personal symbol of faith. It was now a reminder that sometimes the most powerful arguments come not from force or authority, but from a deep understanding of the principles that govern both our rights and our responsibilities. The story of what happened in courtroom 5B that day would be retold many times, serving as a testament to the power of knowledge, the importance of respectful discourse, and the enduring principle that true justice requires both wisdom and understanding. Let us know in the comments if you've ever encountered a situation where knowledge and understanding helped transform a confrontation into a moment of shared wisdom. Remember to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that true strength often comes in unexpected forms.